My boss looked me straight in the eye and told me I was too ugly for sales. 3 months later, I closed the biggest deal in company history while he watched his golden boy lose us our most important client. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about success, loyalty, and the power of proving everyone wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in conference room B buzzed like angry wasps overhead as I arranged my presentation materials one final time. The mahogany table that dominated the space had witnessed countless deals, strategic discussions, and career-defining moments over the years. Today, it felt more like a courtroom than a boardroom. I'd been with Meridian Solutions for 7 years, working my way up from administrative assistant to junior account coordinator to my current role as senior sales support specialist. It wasn't the title I wanted, but it was progress. Every quarterly review, every successful project completion, every client testimonial had been a stepping stone toward my real goal, becoming a full sales representative. The door swung open with unnecessary force, and in walked Richard Blackwood, our sales director. At 48, Richard commanded attention the moment he entered any room. His tailored suits cost more than most people's monthly rent, his silver hair was always perfectly styled, and his confidence filled every corner of whatever space he occupied. Behind him trailed his latest protege, Connor Walsh, a 26-year-old former college quarterback who'd been hired as a sales representative 6 months ago, despite having zero experience in our industry. Connor possessed everything Richard valued in a salesperson: classic good looks, an athletic build, a firm handshake, and the kind of easy charm that made clients feel like they were talking to their best friend's successful younger brother. His Northwestern University business degree hung prominently in his cubicle, right next to his fraternity composite photo and a picture of him shaking hands with the governor at some charity golf tournament. "Morning, Margaret," Richard said, settling into the chair at the head of the table without looking at me directly. His tone carried that particular brand of dismissiveness I'd grown accustomed to over the years, the kind that made it clear I was furniture rather than a colleague. "Good morning, Richard. I've prepared the client analysis you requested for the Hartwell Industries proposal." I slid the bound presentation across the table, along with 3 additional copies for the other attendees who would arrive shortly. Connor dropped into the chair beside Richard, immediately pulling out his phone to check messages. His designer polo shirt and khakis screamed casual Friday, even though it was Tuesday. Everything about his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Before the others get here," Richard began, leaning back in his chair with the air of someone about to deliver profound wisdom, "I wanted to discuss your future here at Meridian." My heart quickened. For months, I'd been dropping hints about my interest in transitioning to sales. I'd completed additional training courses on my own time, attended industry networking events, and consistently exceeded every performance metric in my current role. The quarterly numbers showed that accounts I supported had a 23% higher retention rate than the company average. "I appreciate that, Richard. I've been hoping we could talk about opportunities in sales." He exchanged a glance with Connor, who looked up from his phone just long enough to smirk. That expression should have been my first warning. "Here's the thing, Margaret. Sales is about relationships. It's about making clients feel comfortable, confident, and excited about doing business with us. It's about presentation and first impressions." I nodded, unsure where this was heading but sensing the shift in his tone. "You're incredibly detail-oriented. Your research is thorough, your reports are comprehensive, and your organizational skills are top-notch. But sales requires a different skill set entirely." Richard paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Connor had put his phone away now and was watching with undisguised interest. "The truth is, Margaret, and I'm only saying this because I care about your career development, you're just not sales material. Our clients expect a certain type of representative. Someone who fits the image they have in mind when they think of success." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't yet see. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," I said, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on what he probably thought was a gentle, paternal tone. "Look, you're a nice person, you work hard. But let's be honest here. Sales is about attraction, about making people want to be around you, want to do business with you. Our industry is still very much about golf courses and client dinners and building relationships over drinks. Connor nodded sagely, as if he were witnessing the delivery of ancient wisdom, rather than watching his boss demolish someone's career aspirations. What I'm trying to say is that you don't have the look that opens doors. You're too… how do I put this diplomatically? You're too plain, too unremarkable. Frankly, you're too ugly for sales. The words hit like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold, then hot again. My carefully prepared talking points about my qualifications evaporated. The presentation materials I'd spent hours perfecting suddenly felt like props in someone else's play. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Richard, I don't think appearance should be the determining factor in sales ability. My track record speaks for itself. The accounts I support have consistently outperformed. He held up a hand to stop me. Margaret, I know this is hard to hear, but I'm doing you a favor by being direct. Some people are meant to be in the spotlight, and some people are meant to work behind the scenes. You're exceptional at behind-the-scenes work. Why not focus on becoming the best at what you're already good at? Connor finally spoke up, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that only comes from never having been told no. Besides, clients want to work with people they can relate to. People who look like success. It's just human nature. I stared at both of them, processing not just the words but the casual way they'd been delivered. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a moment of poor judgment. This was calculated. This was policy disguised as feedback. So my 7 years here, my performance metrics, my client testimonials, none of that matters because you think I'm unattractive. Richard's expression softened into what he probably thought was kindness. It's not personal, Margaret, it's business. And the business reality is that image matters. Connor here. He gestured to his golden boy. Connor has the complete package. Looks, personality, education, athletic background. Clients take one look at him and think, winner, that's what we need in sales. As if summoned by the compliment, Connor straightened in his chair and flashed the 1,000-watt smile that had probably gotten him through most challenges in his life. The conference room door opened, and in walked Janet Morrison, our operations manager, followed by David Chen from finance. The morning meeting was about to begin, but the real business had already been concluded. We'll table this discussion for now, Richard said, returning to his professional demeanor as if the previous conversation had never happened. But I want you to think about what I've said. Sometimes the greatest kindness is helping people understand their limitations. The meeting proceeded as planned. We reviewed quarterly projections, discussed resource allocation, and analyzed competitor activities. I participated when required, took notes when appropriate, and maintained the professional facade I'd perfected over 7 years of corporate life. But internally, I was rewriting every interaction I'd ever had with Richard. Every passed-over promotion, every project assignment that went to someone less qualified, every subtle dismissal that I'd attributed to coincidence or politics. It hadn't been about my work. It had been about my face. Connor presented the preliminary strategy for the Hartwell Industries pitch, our biggest potential client of the year. Hartwell was a manufacturing giant, looking to modernize their supply chain management systems. The contract was worth $8 million over 3 years, the kind of deal that could define a salesperson's career and set company records. As Connor stumbled through his presentation, mispronouncing technical terms and clearly working from notes he barely understood, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about my wounded pride or my derailed ambitions. This was about a fundamental injustice that went far beyond my personal situation. How many other talented people had been dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of what success was supposed to look like? How many brilliant minds had been relegated to supporting roles while less qualified but more conventionally attractive people claimed the spotlight? After the meeting, I returned to my desk in the open-plan office area. My workspace sat in the middle of the sales support section, surrounded by other behind-the-scenes people who kept the company running while the sales team got the glory and the commissions. Around me, my colleagues were settling into their morning routines. Sarah Martinez was updating client databases with meticulous accuracy. Tom Bradley was preparing market research reports that would inform strategy decisions he'd never be credited for making. Lisa Park was coordinating complex logistics that ensured promises made by sales representatives would actually be kept. Each of them was exceptional at their job. Each of them had ideas, insights, and capabilities that extended far beyond their current roles. And each of them had probably been told in one way or another that they weren't sales material. I opened my computer and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I began typing. Not a resignation letter or a complaint to HR, but something else entirely. A plan. If Richard thought appearance was the only thing that mattered in sales, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. If Connor represented the future of our industry, then our industry was in more trouble than anyone realized. And if they thought I would quietly accept my place in the background, they had seriously underestimated who they were dealing with. I started by pulling up every piece of research I'd compiled on Hartwell Industries over the past 2 months. Richard might control who got to present to clients, but he couldn't control who understood them better. While Connor had been learning basic product features, I'd been studying Hartwell's business model, their pain points, their corporate culture, and their decision-making process. The more I read through my notes, the more convinced I became that Connor's approach was fundamentally flawed. He was preparing to sell them a standardized solution that would require them to adapt their processes to our system. But what Hartwell really needed was a customized approach that would integrate seamlessly with their existing operations. I opened a new document and began outlining an alternative strategy, not because I thought I'd get the chance to present it, but because the process of thinking it through was helping me understand exactly what I was capable of when given the opportunity to prove myself. By lunchtime, I had compiled a comprehensive analysis that went far beyond anything Connor had prepared. I understood Hartwell's industry pressures, their competitive challenges, and their long-term strategic goals. More importantly, I had identified 3 specific ways our services could address problems they hadn't even realized they needed to solve. As I was organizing my research, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emily, who worked as a marketing director for a tech startup in Austin. "How's the meeting go? Ready to become the next sales superstar?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Change of plans. Apparently I'm too ugly for sales." My phone rang immediately. "What did you just say?" Emily's voice carried the kind of controlled fury that had made her legendary in her own industry. I gave her the abbreviated version of the morning's conversation, editing out some of the more brutal details to spare both of us. "Margaret, please tell me you're planning to sue them into oblivion." "I'm planning something," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what that something was yet. "Good, because if you don't destroy them, I will." Nobody talks to my sister like that. After hanging up, I sat quietly at my desk, watching the sales team operate. Richard held court in his glass-walled office, gesticulating animatedly, while Connor nodded along. Through the transparent walls, I could see them laughing about something, probably planning their approach to the Hartwell presentation. They looked confident. They looked successful. They looked like everything corporate America thought sales representatives should look like. But confidence without competence was just arrogance. And arrogance had a way of creating opportunities for people who were smart enough to recognize them. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing something I'd never done before. Instead of focusing solely on my assigned tasks, I began systematically analyzing every major sales opportunity our company was pursuing. I studied the clients, researched their industries, and identified patterns in their decision-making processes. What I discovered was both illuminating and troubling. Time and again, our sales approach relied on surface-level charm and generic presentations. We were winning contracts through relationships and personality rather than genuine understanding of client needs. It worked often enough to maintain profitability, but it was leaving enormous potential on the table. More concerning, it was setting us up for long-term client dissatisfaction as our solutions failed to deliver the specific value each client actually needed. As the day wound down, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. I wasn't going to accept Richard's assessment of my limitations. I wasn't going to quietly retreat to my supporting role and pretend this conversation had never happened. Instead, I was going to prove that everything he thought he knew about sales was wrong. Not through arguments or complaints or appeals to fairness, but through results. The Hartwell Industries deal was scheduled to close within the next 90 days. Connor would get his chance to shine, to prove that looks and charm were sufficient to land the biggest contract in company history. but I would be ready if he failed. And based on what I'd observed of his preparation and understanding of the client, failure seemed not just possible but probable. I gathered my research materials and headed for the parking garage, my mind already racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing a plan that would either vindicate everything I believed about merit and competence, or confirm that Richard was right about the way the world really worked. Either way, I was done accepting other people's limitations as my own reality. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying Richard's words and wondering if he might actually be right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe 7 years of hard work and exceptional performance meant nothing if I didn't have the right face to go with it. But as I sat in my car in the Meridian Solutions parking garage, something shifted inside me. I pulled down the visor mirror and looked at myself honestly for the first time in years. Brown hair that I kept in a practical shoulder-length cut. Green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. A face that would never launch 1,000 ships but had launched 1,000 successful projects. No, I wasn't conventionally beautiful. But I was intelligent, determined, and capable of things that Connor Walsh couldn't even comprehend. I snapped the visor shut and walked into the building with a new sense of purpose. The sales floor was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Connor was at his desk, feet propped up, scrolling through his phone while talking loudly about his weekend skiing trip to Whistler. His voice carried across the open office space, ensuring everyone could hear about his adventures and expensive hobbies. The powder was absolutely pristine. He was saying to whoever would listen, reminded me of my days on the Northwestern ski team. You know, there's really nothing like the rush of a perfect rundown fresh snow. I settled into my workstation and opened the files I'd been compiling on Hartwell Industries. While Connor regaled the office with tales of his athletic prowess, I dove deeper into understanding what made our potential client tick. Hartwell Industries wasn't just another manufacturing company. They were a fourth-generation family business that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and multiple economic recessions by adapting and innovating. Their current CEO, Patricia Hartwell Morrison, was the great-granddaughter of the founder and had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and completely unimpressed by superficial charm. As I researched further, I discovered something that made my pulse quicken. Patricia Hartwell Morrison had given a keynote speech at the National Manufacturing Association conference 3 months ago, titled "Substance Over Style: Why Pretty Presentations Kill Real Innovation." In the speech, she'd criticized the tendency of vendors to focus on flashy proposals rather than genuine understanding of manufacturing challenges. This was exactly the kind of insight that could make or break a sales presentation, and I was willing to bet that Connor had no idea it existed. I spent the morning diving deeper into Hartwell's corporate culture and Patricia's leadership philosophy. What I found painted a picture of a company that valued expertise, authenticity, and results above all else. They'd recently terminated relationships with 2 vendors who'd promised big but delivered little, and they were clearly gun-shy about working with anyone who seemed more style than substance. Around 10:30, my email chimed with a message from Richard. The subject line read, "Hartwell presentation, support required. Margaret? Connor needs research support for the Hartwell presentation next week. Please compile background information on their operations and provide talking points for the meeting. Standard corporate overview material will suffice. Also, please coordinate travel arrangements for Connor and myself. We'll need flights to Phoenix and hotel accommodations near their headquarters. Regards, Richard I stared at the email for a long moment, feeling a familiar surge of frustration. Standard corporate overview material will suffice. It was exactly the kind of generic, surface-level approach that would fail spectacularly with a client like Patricia Hartwell Morrison. But instead of complying with Richard's request, I made a different choice. I replied professionally, confirming that I would handle the travel arrangements. But I said nothing about limiting my research to, standard corporate overview material. If Connor wanted to walk into that meeting unprepared, that was his choice. But I would be ready with something far more substantial. Over the next 3 days, I transformed myself into an expert on everything Hartwell Industries. I read every annual report from the past 5 years, studied their supply chain challenges, analyzed their competitor landscape, and researched the personal backgrounds of their entire executive team. I discovered that Patricia Hartwell Morrison had an engineering degree from MIT and had spent 5 years working on the factory floor before moving into management. She understood manufacturing from the ground up and had little patience for consultants who tried to impress her with buzzwords instead of genuine expertise. I also learned that Hartwell was facing 3 specific challenges that our competitors weren't addressing. First, they needed a solution that could integrate with their legacy systems without requiring a complete infrastructure overhaul. Second, they were under pressure to improve their environmental footprint while maintaining profitability. Third, they needed real-time visibility into their supply chain to better respond to market fluctuations. Most importantly, I discovered that Patricia had built her career on being underestimated. As a woman in manufacturing, she'd faced decades of people assuming she wasn't qualified for her role. This wasn't just a business decision for her, it was personal. Meanwhile, Connor's preparation consisted mainly of reviewing our standard sales presentation and practicing his opening jokes. I watched him rehearse his pitch to Richard, complete with hand gestures and practiced pauses for laughter. It was polished, professional, and completely generic. The key is to establish rapport right away, Connor explained to anyone who would listen. Get them laughing, get them comfortable, and then they're ready to hear about solutions. Richard nodded approvingly. Exactly right. People buy from people they like. Everything else is just details. As I listened to their strategy sessions, I realized they were planning to treat Patricia Hartwell Morrison like every other client they'd ever pitched. They would rely on Connor's charm, Richard's authority, and a presentation that could have been given to any company in any industry. It was going to be a disaster. On Thursday afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call that changed everything. The caller ID showed Hartwell Industries, and for a moment, I wondered if somehow they'd learned about our upcoming presentation and were calling to cancel. "This is Margaret Chen," I answered, using my most professional tone. "Ms. Chen, this is Janet Williams, Executive Assistant to Patricia Hartwell Morrison. I'm calling because we've had a scheduling conflict arise for next week's presentation meeting." My heart sank. If they canceled the meeting, Connor would never get the chance to fail, and I would never get the chance to prove that there was a better way. "I'm sorry to hear about the conflict," I said carefully. "Actually, it might work out better for everyone. Ms. Hartwell Morrison has been called to Washington for an emergency meeting with the EPA regarding new environmental regulations that could impact our industry. She'll be returning Tuesday evening and could meet Wednesday instead of Monday." I quickly checked the calendar. Wednesday was when Richard and Connor were scheduled to be at the annual sales conference in Las Vegas, an event they'd been planning to attend for months. "Let me check with our team and get back to you," I said, my mind already racing with possibilities. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The universe had just handed me an opportunity that I never could have planned. I walked over to Richard's office and knocked on the glass door. He waved me in without looking up from his computer. "Hartwell Industries just called," I said. "They need to reschedule the Monday meeting to Wednesday." Richard's head snapped up. "Wednesday? But that's when Connor and I will be in Vegas for the conference." "I know. I wanted to check with you before responding to their scheduling request." Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly weighing his options. The sales conference was important for networking and staying current with industry trends. But the Hartwell deal was the biggest opportunity of the year. "Can they do Thursday instead?" "I can ask, but she mentioned that Ms. Hartwell Morrison has a very tight schedule and Wednesday is the only option they can offer before she travels to Europe the following week." Richard drummed his fingers on his desk, clearly frustrated. This is exactly the kind of thing that happens when you're dealing with these demanding executives. They think the world revolves around their schedule. I waited silently while he considered his options. "You know what?" he finally said. "Connor and I have already paid for the conference registration and booked our accommodations. This Hartwell meeting should have been locked down weeks ago. If they can't stick to the original schedule, maybe they're not the kind of client we want to work with anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard was actually considering walking away from an $8 million deal because it conflicted with a networking event. "Are you sure about that? This is a significant opportunity." "Margaret, there will be other opportunities. But the relationships we build at the conference could lead to deals for years to come. Sometimes you have to think about the bigger picture." As I listened to Richard rationalize his decision, I realized that this was exactly the kind of thinking that was holding our company back. He was so focused on maintaining his comfort zone and his social calendar that he was willing to sacrifice genuine opportunities. What if I went instead? I heard myself saying. Richard looked at me like I'd just suggested that I fly to the moon. You? Margaret, we've already discussed this. You're not qualified for client-facing sales work. But I've been doing all the research on Hartwell. I probably understand their business better than anyone else in the company right now. And you said yourself that this is just a scheduling conflict, not a reflection of their interest level. Richard shook his head. Absolutely not. I'm not sending someone with no sales experience to meet with our biggest potential client. If they can't accommodate our schedule, we'll pursue other opportunities. What if Connor stayed and I went with him? I could provide technical support while he handled the relationship building. Connor's committed to the conference. He's presenting on a panel about next-generation sales techniques. This is important for his professional development. I stared at Richard, finally understanding that this had nothing to do with qualifications or scheduling conflicts. This was about maintaining the established hierarchy and ensuring that certain people stayed in their designated roles. So you're willing to lose the biggest deal of the year because it's inconvenient? I'm willing to maintain our standards and our priorities. Sometimes that means making difficult choices. I nodded slowly, knowing that arguing further would be pointless. But as I walked back to my desk, I was already formulating a different plan. I called Janet Williams back and confirmed that Wednesday was the only option. Then I asked a question that would either open a door or close it forever. Ms. Williams, I've been doing extensive research on Hartwell Industries in preparation for this meeting. Would it be possible for me to present our proposal if our primary sales representative isn't available? There was a pause on the other end of the line. What's your role with Meridian Solutions? Quote, I'm a senior sales support specialist. I've been with the company for 7 years, and I've been working on the Hartwell analysis for the past several weeks. And you feel comfortable presenting to Ms. Hartwell Morrison without your sales team? I took a deep breath. Yes, I do. I believe I understand your business needs better than anyone else at our company right now. Another pause. Ms. Chen, can I ask you something off the record? Of course. Are you being given this opportunity because you're the best person for the job, or because you're the only person available? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Even Hartwell's assistant could see through the circumstances that had led to this moment. Honestly, I'm available because there's a scheduling conflict, but I'm qualified because I've spent the past month studying everything about your company, your industry, and your specific challenges. I may not be the person they plan to send, but I'm the person who's most prepared to have this conversation. I appreciate your honesty. Let me talk to Ms. Hartwell Morrison and see how she wants to proceed. Can I call you back within the hour? Absolutely. As I waited for the callback, I realized that I was either about to get the opportunity of a lifetime or confirm once and for all that Richard had been right about my limitations. My phone rang exactly 47 minutes later. Ms. Chen, this is Patricia Hartwell Morrison. I nearly dropped the phone. The CEO herself was calling me directly. Ms. Hartwell Morrison, it's an honor to speak with you. Ms. Chen, my assistant tells me that you've been researching our company and that you believe you understand our business needs. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. I've spent considerable time studying Hartwell Industries, and I believe I've identified some specific areas where Meridian Solutions could provide significant value. Such as? I took a deep breath and dove in. Your legacy system integration challenges, your environmental compliance pressures, and your need for real-time supply chain visibility. Most vendors want to sell you a complete replacement system, but what you really need is a solution that enhances your existing capabilities while positioning you for future growth. There was silence on the other end of the line for what felt like an eternity. Ms. Chen, how long have you been in sales? I haven't. I'm in sales support. But I've been supporting sales teams for 7 years, and I've learned that understanding the client's business is more important than having a polished presentation. Interesting. And why isn't your sales team handling this meeting? I could have lied. I could have made up some story about their expertise being needed elsewhere. Instead, I decided to tell the truth. Because they're attending a sales conference in Las Vegas, and they felt that was a higher priority than meeting with you. Another long pause. Ms. Chen, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I've been in business for 25 years, and I've sat through hundreds of sales presentations. Most of them were delivered by people who looked like they belonged in sales, but had no idea what they were talking about. Very few were delivered by people who actually understood my business. I understand, ma'am. I'm willing to meet with you Wednesday, but not because you're the only option available. I'm willing to meet with you because you're the first person from your company who seems to have done their homework. Don't disappoint me. I won't. After she hung up, I sat at my desk in stunned silence. Patricia Hartwell Morrison, the CEO of our biggest potential client, had just given me the opportunity that Richard and Connor had dismissed as inconvenient. Now I had 3 days to prepare the presentation of my life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.